Welcome to another Regent Ramas recording. Let's take a look at this tabard that I'm working on. I'm trying to make 4 tabards, and I'm trying to use material that I just kind of have around the house. So what I found in my awesome closet of disaster was a bunch of fabric that has a few unique features. One is the fabric that I have comes in rolls, and these are actually cut off lengths. You can get these from companies that create drapes or refinish furniture. I happen to get a couple of rolls from the reuse center here in Edmonton. Now these rolls are cut off, literally. They've cut them to this width. So I have strips of fabric that are this wide. One side is the cut edge. The other side is this pattern edge. I'm actually going to get close to the camera to show you. This is called the finish edge of the fabric. The finish edge of the fabric actually has a bunch of different pattern threads running through it. And I have decided that I'm going to leave that for my tabards. I'm going to leave that on the outside and actually use that as the outside edge of the tabard. The reason why I'm doing that is 1, it saves me having to finish this edge myself. 2, it's already on the fabric and this will not fray. The inside edge of the fabric, this portion of the fabric here, this will fray if it's not finished. And what I've done on this tabard is I've just used a zigzag stitch on the inside of the tabard. It's this 2-panel. I've just used a zigzag stitch on the inside of the tabard to prevent this from fraying. So on the outside of my tabard, I've got this pre-finished edge, and on the inside of my tabard, I've got this zigzag stitch. And this is true, sorry, I should show you the other fabric. This is true of both fabrics. You can't really see it very well on the camera, but there's 3 strands of thread running through this finished edge of the fabric that actually prevents this fabric from fraying. It won't fray on the finished edge. Now this is a really great way to save money when making stuff out of scrap material, is to not finish one of the edges and use the finished edge of the fabric as your outside edge. This is the tabard that I finished in my 26-second video, and you can see that the outside edge of the fabric actually has a fairly interesting pattern to it. And both sides then make for, it's actually slightly fancy. All rolls of fabric, no matter how wide, have that outside finished edge on both sides of the fabric. So as you're creating, it's nice to be able to take that finished edge and use it on a project where it's maybe not as fancy, you don't need to finish, you're not putting cuffs on it, there's no sleeves being added or anything, and that then becomes your finished edge. I like to use bias tape. Bias tape can be finished in 2 different ways. This bias tape, this is black bias tape. I actually made a video a couple of years ago to show you how to make your own bias tape, but in this case, I just buy bias tape, and yes, I buy it by the roll. Great monster rolls. As many meters as I can get. I think there's 60 meters on this roll. I bought 100-meter rolls before, and I get them from my local shop. I just go in and say, do you have a whole roll of this? And then they just sell me the whole amount. So I'm not getting a really smoking good deal. And you have to be careful when you buy bias tape off of, say, Amazon, because you never know what you're going to get when it finally gets to your house. Bias tape comes in all different fabrics. You can get cotton bias tape, you can get satin bias tape, you can get polyester bias tape. My preference is to use a polyester cotton, 50-50 or 60-40 or 70-30 blend, because all the things that I make are somehow a cotton polyester blend. Even this fabric right here is a cotton polyester blend. It looks like it's a kind of a canvas, but it doesn't melt very well, but it also doesn't burn very well. So on this edge here, I'm just talking and I'm going to keep going. On this edge here, I've done a zigzag stitch just to connect my 2 panels. I've got the 2 panels, I've connected them. This is the inside of the tabard here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip this sucker inside out, or sorry, right side in, and I'm going to work on making the collar. I want to show you guys how I make the collar for the tabard, because I make it using bias tape. And in my 23-second video, it only takes me about 15 seconds to do it, but in real life it takes quite a bit longer. And the most important thing is the cutting, because the sewing of the bias tape just takes time. So all I'm doing is I'm taking my tabard, I'm folding it in half so that I have where the shoulder is going to sit, which is basically, so I'm just folding it in half, and so the shoulders is going to sit right here. This is going to be the top of the tabard, and this is where the shoulders sit. And I'm going to grab my measuring tape here now, and I'm going to measure the entire width of this tabard. from edge to edge so I can find the exact center. These two panels of fabric are not the same width, clearly. It doesn't matter. This is a piece of loaner garb, and it doesn't matter if it's a narrow strip, and then a middle strip, and then a wide strip, or if you have zigzag patterns, or if there's diamonds, or if it's squares. Patterned tabards are normal, and we should just accept whatever pattern comes from our leftover fabrics. Okay, so I've got 29 inches, which is going to give me 14.5 inches, which means that the center of my tabard is right here. I'm using my very fancy, very cool chalk pencil to mark my tabards. I like using chalk. Some people use fabric pens and pencils. The chalk is my favorite just because it wipes off if I don't like it. I'm marking the center of my tabard. And then I'm going to take my awesome keyhole template. This keyhole template allows me to create keyhole necklines of pretty well any size. And the most important piece of the keyhole template is this opening in the middle. It's not a circle. I'm going to hold this up for you and show you some of the features. It's not a circle, okay? It's shallow on top, it's deep on the bottom, and it's got some pencil markings. Down here it has a center marking. Up here it has a shoulder line marking on this side and on this side. And you can get this template online. There are 1,000 places where you can print off a template like this. I happen to measure this off of myself so that I know it fits my 17-inch neck, okay? But with this down here, you can actually make this line as deep as you want, so it'll fit any neckline. So I'm going to take my template. I'm lining up the center of my template with the center of my tabard. You can see it's not in the middle. It's not between the two panels. It's actually offset. And because I have my two shoulder marks here on my template, I just line those shoulder marks up with the top of my fabric. So I'm lining up the center of the center of my tabard here with the center of my keyhole template and the shoulder marks. Then it's an easy thing for me to take my chalk and chalk out the inside of my neckline. Ta-da! Easy peasy. Taking the time to build a proper template saves you all kinds of time measuring tabards and tunics and dresses and stuff in the future, because then I have that I can just keep measuring off of. So there is the chalk marks, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add about, I don't know, 3 fingers width of chalk for the cut. So this is going to be my cut mark. So when you do a neckline, it's just like this button-up shirt. Again, let me get in front of the camera. Just like this button-up shirt, you have your opening, and then you have a slit that comes down the front, and that slit allows your head to get in and out, but then it'll close up. It'll close up as it rests on a chest. We've all seen it, but we don't often think about it. So now I'm going to cut this, and cutting this is what I want you guys to really pay attention to today. In the back of the tabard is not going to be as deep as the front. In fact, I'm not just going to go and cut a big circle out of here, because then that's going to mean that there's a giant circle opening on the back of my neck. What I'm going to do instead is, I'm going to cut into this, and I'm going to cut half of this fabric out to begin with. It's about half. You can measure it down if you want. If you're going to measure it down, it's measure down 2.5 inches. So I'm going to cut out about half of this in a formal semi-formal pattern. You can see here now that what I've cut out from here is the back portion. This is the back portion of the tabard. And now I'm going to finish cutting the front portion. So instead of cutting all the layers together, both layers together, I'm now just going to cut the front. So here's the front piece, coming around, down towards the center, giving it a little bit of a tip, and voila! So that's the piece that comes off of the front. So you can see, I'll just fold this over here for you. This is what it looks like. From the front. And what I've done is I've cut this out so that this portion here is coming out of the back of my tabard. This portion's coming off the front of my tabard. And then I'm finishing the front of the neckline by trimming off another little piece. Let me show you what that looks like. Ta-da! You see? So I've cut so that the back portion here is more shallow than the front. Very important, because you don't want a giant hole back here. This is actually more shallow. And finally, we're going to trim down this portion of the keyhole, which is just a straight cut. Okay, just a straight trim. In order to finish off this neckline with bias tape, I take my bias tape. I'm going to take the bias tape here. I'm going to put it down here so you guys can see it a little better. I'm going to take the bias tape here and I'm going to cut a 1-inch slit right down the middle. So I've taken the bias tape, I've folded it open, I've opened it up, and right down the middle I'm going to cut a 1-inch notch right down the middle. So it creates a little serpent tongue of bias tape. And I'm going to tuck that bias tape into the key cut on my keyhole neckline. Okay. Do is I'll take this to the sewing machine and I'll stitch this straight, and then I'll just keep stitching the bias tape around the neckline till I get to the other end. I'll come back down here and I'll cut another piece. I'll cut the other end of the bias tape so that it also folds under the key cut portion. Let me show you on a finished tabard what that looks like. So this is a tabard that I just finished, and I cut the bias tape. It's longer here in front of the fabric. The fabric folds into the inside of it. And then I've sewn it up and around 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 the neckline, all the way around to the other side. And it's come back down, and then I've measured the length of the tape, cut it off, put my slit in the middle of the bias tape, and then sewed that down. And then at the end, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the camera, I put a really thick zigzag stitch in here. I just put a really heavy zigzag stitch in there. That's just to prevent this thing from tearing open. And so that is how I do tabard, keyhole, necklines with bias tape. Let's put this on. Nice keyhole in the front, nice there. See how it fits around the back? This has been a Regent Ramas recording. I'll see you guys next time.